Hi, sports fans. Collin Sherwin from DK Nation alongside Douglas Farmer, who covers Notre Dame for NBC Sports. Doug, welcome. How you doing today?
I'm hanging in there, Colin. I could use a little more sleep, but that, I guess, at this point is to be expected.
For sure. So, Doug, normally you and I are chatting about who's going to cover this week and opening lines and how to get ahead of what might be coming later in the week. But I'm going to say it's been a busy 48 to 72 hours for you. Brian Kelly is off to LSU for ungodly amounts of money. The Notre Dame Fighting Irish, who are sitting at number 6 right now in the college football playoff rankings, and still incredibly have a path to the to the college football playoff. It's an unlikely path, but it's better than, like, say, 30-1. I would take 30-1 at Notre Dame making it right now.
I ran those numbers earlier this week, and I see two scenarios: one where Alabama wins and one where Alabama loses. And if Alabama wins, Notre Dame has only like an 8% chance at making the playoff.
Okay.
But if Alabama loses, honestly, it's about 65%.
That's
Like,
incredible.
Notre Dame has a viable chance at the playoff. They need one upset out of 3 games. And sure, two of those are 10-point spreads, but even a 10-point spread isn't an inconceivable upset. The third is a 6.5-point spread. We're not talking about Bowling Green over Minnesota. We're talking about Iowa against Michigan or Baylor against Oklahoma State. So, yeah, Notre Dame has a viable chance at the playoff, and yet it doesn't have a head coach, which, doing so voluntarily, I honestly think is a first in sports history.
It is.
Even a possible championship team on your own volition is completely unprecedented. As far as I can tell, the only comparison is 1989 Michigan basketball. And even then, he said he was leaving after the tournament, and Volstein Bleckler said, nah, you go ahead and leave now. So it wasn't entirely voluntary.
Right. And then Steve Fisher takes him all the way. Vermil Robinson makes a free throw, and we have
Right.
chaos. But now on this side, I'm stunned by this. I don't think it's great for college football. I think we might see the AFCA, the College Football Coaches Association, do something to address. Well, maybe we put in a rule where if you start with a team at the beginning of the season, you're not allowed to recruit or sign with a team until after the late signing period ends in February or something. I don't know how we can manage this. The free market's going to be the free market, and that's sort of what college football is. But maybe there's some sort of rule that we can put in here to keep this from coming, because it's really not fair to the kids of Notre Dame, who have played fantastic football this year at 11-1, certainly outpaced my expectations. I think they hit about your expectations. You knew this team was good from the
I didn't
jump.
see 11-1 coming. I saw over 8.5 or over 9, which were the preseason win totals. I saw 9 as worst case scenario, a push. Like 10, I expected 10-2. If you're asking me what I expected, it was 10-2. They'd lose one game they should and one game they shouldn't. And instead, they never lost a game they shouldn't.
Right, for sure. So you're the Subway alumni, the locals, the students. I have a friend who's a professor there. He says he actually put up, and I'll send it to you, on his test today, a picture of purple face Brian Kelly from 2012 as one of his test questions today for his exam in class. How are they feeling about South Bend? This is a spurn. This is a pretty clear spurn. What's the feeling and the motivation around the program right now? How do people feel about Brian Kelly? Is there anyone who understands and says, well, you got a chance at national championship and $100 million? Maybe
it would have been understood if Notre Dame did not have a viable playoff chance. Okay. If we are talking Sunday afternoon after the playoff rankings have come out and Notre Dame finishes number 5 and Brian Kelly takes off, it would have been, well, this was unexpected, but fine. Doing so when Notre Dame could still possibly, maybe have a national championship chance is just a version of, it has elicited a version of anger I didn't expect. And it's awfully hypocritical of Brian Kelly in like a forward-looking way of, you go to LSU because LSU is coach-proof. The last 3 coaches there have won national championships. You won a national championship, you go be the head coach at LSU. But also, if you won a national championship, don't you coach the team that is still in the national championship picture right now? And so that's where there's this disconnect, and it has left people very angry. The way Monday night was handled was poor. The way Tuesday morning was handled was worse. And so that is solidified the team. This is a team who, from all accounts, very much loved Brian Kelly as of Saturday night. Saturday night in the post-game locker room at Stanford, they're chanting chug so loud that you can hear it down the hallway while he pours a Gatorade into the trophy that Notre Dame and Stanford share, and he chugs it in the locker room like they were enjoying it. And by Tuesday at 7:15 in the morning, more accurately 7:05 in the morning, that roster didn't want anything to do with him. He reportedly, his team meeting on Tuesday morning was 2 minutes of see ya and just walked out the door. And it's created a version of anger that I did not expect, and is in its own way unique. And in college football, like everything's unique, but this was a step toward, wow, this really is something I haven't seen before in college football.
Do you think if Kelly had gone, and the whole point of LSU making this overpay is for the early signing period, which is 2 weeks from today. So that's why they want him in now. And that's why they're not wanting to wait. And especially with Lincoln Riley going to USC, Scott Woodward, AD at LSU, is sitting there going, my options are a little limited here, and I'm sick of taking these phone calls. So I get it from that end. But if Kelly had come out and said, you know what, I'm taking that job as soon as we handle our business here. So I'm going to go on the road and recruit for the next 2 weeks for LSU, and I'm going to be LSU's coach next year. But no matter what, I'm coaching this team in any postseason game that they go to. Would there have been less anger in South Bend?
I think Jack Swarbrick would have channeled some Bo Schembechler. I do think Jack Swarbrick is a very proud Notre Dame alum. That's Notre Dame's director of athletics, for anybody who doesn't know. Jack Swarbrick has been Notre Dame's AD for 14 years. He hired Brian Kelly. He has done a lot of good for the University of Notre Dame while maintaining independence and other traditions to the university. If Brian Kelly had said that, I think Jack Swarbrick would have looked at him and said, you go. It would have been handled classier than Bo Schembechler supposedly saying a Michigan man will coach Michigan. Jack Swarbrick would have done it behind closed doors, of Brian Kelly reconsidering in a day or two or whatever. But I do not think he would have been allowed to do that.
Wow.
If there's some shadow deal with LSU, perhaps, but that's the whole question of, is that even viable when, as you said, the concern is the early signing period.
Yeah, for sure. And 2 weeks from today is going to be massively crucial. And especially in this turned up cycle that we all have now, the early signing period is good for the kids. And that should be the priority in all of college athletics. These kids should be able to sign early and get that off their back as quickly as possible and make their decision. As long as there's a reciprocal relationship where the school wants them and they want the school, let them put that. I'm all for that. I think it benefits. It's pro player. Although you could argue that these kids should be signing grant aids and not NILs, because if they sign a grant aid, then they can just go to college anyway.
That's a different conversation.
That's a different conversation for sure. But the whole NIL as a concept is another conversation. But if we're going to have NIL, I think early signing is probably the way to go. But it's not great for the sport, because Lincoln Riley, Oklahoma still has a bowl game. Oklahoma's going to play in a New Year's Six bowl game. And maybe it's not great that this cycle has just turned up so much. So we can deal with the outcome of that, but I'm interested that Swarbrick would have not possibly.
That's just my speculation.
That's your guess.
This is a complete hypothetical.
Sure.
But it's like you mentioned, Lincoln Riley, a coach leaving before a New Year's Six bowl is something we have maybe not a New Year's Six bowl seen before, but we've seen it before bowl games. Sure. A coach leaving before the national championship is still in play is where I think Swarbrick would have had to do something decisive and like that extreme. It's not just, oh yeah, Brian, you want your swan song of the Fiesta Bowl, whatever. Game doesn't really matter. It would be, we might be playing Georgia in Dallas on December 30th or whenever the semifinals are this year. We can't be messing around with you recruiting for LSU.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's crazy. And I completely understand that. And, this is college sports is going to have to figure out a way to address this. There's a constitutional convention going on that just is wrapping up. The college football playoff put out a statement today saying we're not doing anything about the current scenario, no possibility of expansion, while we're in this period of sort of changing how college athletics looks in the calendar and the rules. This is something I think they got to look at. So in terms of who the candidates will be for this job, it's not one of the top 5 jobs in the country, but it's definitely one of the top 15 jobs in the country. Who do you think Notre Dame will be chasing? Right now, it seems like a lot of speculation is around defensive coordinator Marcus Freeman. You also have Tommy Rees, who is the offensive coordinator. Would he be able to stay on? Clearly, he's done well with this program. I saw Tommy Rees throw a pick under the lights at Michigan Stadium in 2013, I think it was. I went to a doubleheader that day. Sorry.
Just one.
No, well, one big one in the fourth quarter in the red zone, right in front of me, actually. But he's clearly transitioned into becoming a coach that's going to be viable for some head coaching jobs at some point. But Marcus Freeman seems to be the guy internally, at least. Do they stay internal? And if not, where are they looking externally?
Well, first I want to say, you said who will they chase? And I think that's the difference between now and Brian Kelly was hired. Notre Dame's not chasing anymore. It is. A week ago, I would have said Notre Dame was one of the 6 most stable programs in the country. And yeah, Notre Dame and Oklahoma were both in those 6, and they both just lost their coaches. But it is that kind of program right now where the obvious question is, would Luke Fickell leave a playoff-bound Cincinnati? A week ago, I would have said no, but Brian Kelly may have just left a playoff-bound Notre Dame. So all these precedents are being thrown out the window. It is Luke Fickell or Marcus Freeman, as far as I'm concerned. And these two were working together a year ago. They are lifelong friends, and there's a unique dynamic in that respect. I don't want to go out on too much of a limb and say, well, it's going to be Marcus Freeman, but every indication suggests Notre Dame is readying itself to hire Marcus Freeman as its head coach. That's not me reporting anything. That's not me making a prediction. I'm saying the things that have become public all point toward Marcus Freeman as head coach.
And if that's the case, that's probably the best for the recruiting transition. Notre Dame is a program that recruits nationally, so they're going to have to keep as many of these kids in the class as they possibly can. Have you had a chance to see what recruit reaction is to this move? Have you seen anything related to that? Because if you keep Marcus Freeman, it seems like you'd be able to keep most of that class together.
Notre Dame has lost 1 4-star safety, Devin Moore, out of Florida. He was already visited by an LSU staffer yesterday. So that you can go ahead and write that one off. But otherwise, Notre Dame's recruits, Notre Dame's roster have all been unanimous on social media, on their own personal podcasts, all of them advocating for Marcus Freeman, which is a piece of player empowerment we've never seen before. We've never heard from them at the beginning of a coaching search. And so it's really, really intriguing to me to see that. And right now it is across the board, Marcus Freeman. And that's where you mentioned the recruits. Notre Dame has 7 consensus 4-star defenders in this current class. In the previous 3 cycles, they signed 8. Marcus Freeman has been a recruiting dynamo for Notre Dame, whether it's him as the head coach or maybe you somehow hold on to him as defensive coordinator, unlikely, but in that sense, like, they need to keep him just for the recruiting, let alone everything else. He has been a complete piece of firepower recruiting these defensive stars.
So I don't understand the finances of Notre Dame as I would an ordinary conference, because it's certainly the way the revenue comes in at South Bend is just different than any other program in the country. You have the NBC contract, you have, ticket sales are a big part of it. There's more money coming in. There's location games, whether you're playing in Ireland or New York or wherever, that are going to bring in different kinds of revenue than any other.
A piece that gets overlooked is Notre Dame gets money from the ACC.
Oh,
Notre Dame doesn't get a part of the football share, but all the other TV revenue is allocated, and Notre Dame gets a 15th of that.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
Yeah.
And I guess that makes sense because of the ratings that they bring, because it's 5 games a year, correct? And
well, it's more of the ACC basketball games. Notre Dame gets a full share of whatever piece of revenue is deemed from basketball. Notre Dame gets a full share of whatever other asset. And the ACC basketball tournament does some ratings, and so they undoubtedly feel like, yeah, it's a decent chunk. When Notre Dame was in the ACC for a year last year, it threw its entire NBC money in with the pot and then took an equal share. And in doing so, it broke pretty much even, because the NBC money comes in, and now the ACC has a terrible TV deal, as we all know, in comparison to the SEC or the Big Ten. But in throwing that in, Notre Dame, what it contributed was similar to what it usually did not get from the ACC football distribution.
So let's say it's roughly the value of an ACC program on revenue, which seems about fair. Okay. So if that's the case, Luke Fickell is probably going to need $10 million. And does Notre Dame have that kind of money? Would they be interested in spending that kind of money? What do you think?
Brian Kelly was making somewhere in the range of $8 or $9 million. Notre Dame's contracts aren't public. It's a private institution, but you get to put these things together. So it's not like 10 million would have been hard to manage for Brian Kelly or for Luke Fickell. I think the holdup would be a 10-year deal, which is suddenly the norm. Notre Dame traditionally gives out a 5-year deal upon hiring. Traditionally, that goes back for 4 coaches, from Bob Davie to Ty Willingham to Charlie Weiss to Brian Kelly. And if you really want to nitpick, George O'Leary was going to sign a 5-year deal before he botched that. And that would be the offer. I would expect the offer to be to Fickell of $8 to $10 million for 5 years. But I'm not sure they can even get to a point where they can make an offer to Fickell, because if you're trying to hold together a recruiting class, let alone potentially contend in this playoff, which again is not the most likely thing in the world, but is in play, you're not going to wait to see if Luke Fickell wants your job in January. You're going to try to get some things decided right now. And if not tonight, and I warned you ahead of time that I thought we were safe tonight, so I was clearly committing us to having breaking news. It might still be this week, just because you want to get these things done.
Gotcha. Well, I'm very interested to see what happens here. Last question, and the independence of Notre Dame. I have talked about this my entire adult life. I went up to the only Notre Dame football game. I've been for volleyball and I've been for basketball, but the only football game I went to was in 2012, I think, when USF beat Notre Dame in a 6 hour and 41 minute.
2011.
2011. Yeah.
It was my senior year. During the first rain delay, you were allowed to leave the stadium and return.
Yes.
I may have lived in the dorm closest to the stadium, and I don't know what I would have done with an hour and a half of idle time on a Saturday afternoon in my college dorm room before returning to the football game. I don't know what I possibly could have done. No. Yeah, I remember is a strong word. I know I was at that football game.
Well, whatever you're doing in that dorm room, we started, because we came in from Chicago that morning, and we started about 7 a.m. because we got there early for that one. There was a very large contingent. That's when USF fans still cared about football. I have always wondered, in the modern environment, the independence is so important to the identity of Notre Dame, and proudly so. And I understand why. But right now, the 5 teams ahead in the playoff this week are going to get a 13th data point you're not getting. Is there a way to change that? Is there a way to change that outside of a conference where you're taking on a 13th game annually against a BYU, who is another program that is on the higher echelon? Do you find another way to get a 13th game, even though technically that's not allowed by NCAA rule right now? Is there some sort of, like we have the Hawaii exception. Could we make the Notre Dame exception? Could we do some other things to maybe move that around? Or is this just Notre Dame, besides the academic struggles of getting kids in that we all have heard about for ad nauseum for years, is this just another way that the program's going to be consistently behind the 8 ball in the national championship picture?
Collin, from my interactions with you, you're a smart person. I like you. I don't mean to just outright insult you here, but you're wrong.
Okay.
I pulled up the Georgia football schedule here as just an example.
Okay.
Georgia's 13th data point is Charleston Southern. Of Georgia's other 12 data points, you're going to say, well, yeah, Notre Dame plays Navy. Georgia played UAB. Notre Dame played Toledo. Georgia played Vanderbilt. Georgia played Georgia Tech. These schedules are very comparable. The 13th data point is always an FCS team, with the exception of USC, who's the only other Power 5 team yet to ever play an FCS team. And so that's where, sure, there's a 13th data point. But the 13th data point is not Georgia playing Alabama this weekend. The 13th data point is Georgia playing Charleston Southern 2 weeks ago when Notre Dame was dispatching Georgia Tech 55-0. That's where Notre Dame has never cared. Jack Swarbrick has never cared. Furthermore, as the playoff expands, sure, Notre Dame, and this is going to tie us back to where we started. I thought this was the line of the day by Brian Kelly. He was asked at the end of his LSU introductory press conference, was Notre Dame's leadership being okay with never being allowed to have a bye in an expanded playoff? Was that something that you thought made them look less committed to winning the national championship? And Brian Kelly, in his introductory press conference at LSU, said, and if I'm not quoting directly, I'm coming very close, I was okay with that because it meant you, and again, he's saying this to LSU, right, you were going to be playing in South Bend in December on a snowy field. I was going to be very okay with that.
Yeah.
So if the cost for Notre Dame's independence moving forward is they get conference championship weekend off, but then they have to host a first round game, sometimes I get exhausted doing this job. It's a long football season. The idea of watching Florida or LSU or Texas play at Notre Dame on December 17th is just, that would be enough of a carrot to energize me through some of these seasons, because it would be such an environment and such a twist. I think back to the 2010 Sun Bowl, Notre Dame, Miami, and El Paso, Texas. It snowed. There was snow on the field, and Miami walked out of that tunnel and wanted to walk right back up. And it's those kinds of things that make college football so much fun. And it's that kind of wrinkle that in the expanded playoff, Notre Dame won't care about being independent if it means Southern California has to deal with snow.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I mean, as a Florida resident, I have watched that. I believe the Florida Gators did not play a game at below 40 degrees for like 30 some consecutive years. Yeah, and having that is one of the great home field advantages, because we Florida kids, man, we want no part of that kind of weather in the middle of December.
If that's how the expanded playoff comes to be, if it ever comes to be, like you said, today was another day of inaction. If that's how it ends up being a reality, it'll be fun. It'll be a lot of fun, and it'll be one of those points where Notre Dame goes, yeah, we're independent. We get to play a home playoff game. Cool.
Yeah, interesting. All right, that was great, Doug. Thank you. Excuse me, Douglas. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. While we're here, there's 10 conference championships games this weekend. There's also USC versus Cal. And is there any other game that I'm missing right now? Is that just those 12, I believe, or 11?
I believe it is just
11?
those 11.
Just those 11. So of those 11, give me 2 picks for this weekend, ATS. You've been pretty good this year. I know for sure you've had a good season against the number.
The problem here is you're putting me on a spot on a week where I haven't been tracking numbers, because I've been tracking Brian Kelly and Marcus Freeman and other things. But I will say, I believe Georgia is still favored by less than a touchdown. And I will take that up to the 7. I am not only wearing red and black right now, but maybe the greatest Georgia advocate you've interacted with this season. And then in addition to that, Baylor's quarterback is out. I'm blanking on his name, but
Jerry Bohannon.
Oklahoma State might turn that into a blowout. Baylor's a good team. Dave Aranda is a great coach, but that's the kind of situation where you go down, it might snowball on you. And those are the spots that I love to hit, because you catch an alt line or two and you can really turn a nice spread into a real profit. Some of us have Georgia -4. I've already spent the money. Yeah, I mean, that was gift from the gods right there. Some of us have Georgia. Some of us have Georgia 8-1 to win the national championship. I've already. Congratulations, sir. That is a fine ticket to hold. We will celebrate in Las Vegas, my friend. Thank you so much, Douglas. I appreciate your time. And we will see you on the road, and possibly we'll check in with you as soon as Notre Dame makes a decision here as well. You know how to get me, Collin. Thanks. Thank you.